G'day everyone, I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome to Unparliamentary, which is our fortnightly webinar show where we discuss the latest and what's happening in federal politics. So obviously today we'll be touching on the federal budget amongst other things, but I've just got a couple of quick things to talk to you about before we get going. So I want to begin by acknowledging that we all live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. Acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded here in Australia, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We do these webinars fortnightly, but the days and times do vary. And I know we've changed the date today from Tuesday to Thursday, so we could chat about the budget. But we've got all kinds of other webinars happening, and you can find out the details for those and register at australiainstitute.org.au. And next week, next Tuesday, in fact, at 1 o'clock, we'll be chatting to legal advisor to Julian Assange, barrister Jennifer Robinson. That'll be about the fight to free Julian Assange. And I believe his case is back in the courts next week. So I do hope you can join us for that one. So this week I am joined, or we are joined by journalist Rachel Withers, whose work has appeared in The Politics, The Monthly, The Saturday Paper, Slate, Vox and Crikey. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm joined by my colleagues, Greg Jericho and Matt Grudnoff, Chief Economist and Senior Economist at the Australia Institute. Thanks for joining us, guys. They were both in the budget lockup, so we're going to drill in for lots of details on the budget. But quickly, I want to say, if you've got questions, we'll come to those in the second half of the webinar, and you can type those in the Zoom Q&A box. You should also be able to make comments and on questions and upvote other people's questions, which helps me to find them in the back half of the webinar. A reminder to please keep things civil and on topic in the chat, or we'll boot you out. And lastly, a reminder that this is being recorded and it will go up on our YouTube channel and on our events webpage later this afternoon. So obviously we have just seen the Treasurer deliver his third budget. This evening, the opposition leader will deliver his budget response. We've also seen the government hand down its future gas strategy, amongst other things. There's always a lot happening in politics, Rachel, but what are some of the key elements from the last fortnight that we've seen, and what are some of the issues that have been coming up for the government itself, apart from the budget?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a tricky kind of 2 weeks for the government leading up to the budget. I suppose there's been a couple of mini scandals, I think we could call them, probably starting from it was about 2 weeks ago now that Anthony Albanese mishandled that appearance at the sort of anti-violence against women rallies that we saw across the country, and that prompted the government to have to call like a sort of emergency national cabinet, put forward a policy. We were sort of waiting for more from the budget, didn't really get it. Then last week, we also saw the government put forward, as you mentioned, its future gas strategy, which has caused a little bit of discomfort in the Labor backbenchers, especially amongst Labor MPs who face challenges from the Greens in their inner city seats. So I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later as well. And then I think in recent days, I mean, the budget feels like it has dominated headlines for about 48 hours now, but we've also seen the government sort of trying to get its lines right on these student protests around the country. We saw yesterday those, especially at the University of Melbourne, really ramp up, and you've got the government trying to walk a line here that I think got a little bit more difficult for it last night with West Australian Labor Senator Fatima Payman, who is, I believe, the youngest Member of Parliament, and she has been outspoken in the past on what's going on in Gaza, but she really, really broke party ranks last night by calling it a genocide and using the phrase "from the river to the sea," which the Prime Minister has previously condemned. So bit going on for the government, which would have much rather be focusing, I think, just on the budget.
Mm. And I think we might come back to some of those issues, but I did kind of want to start with the budget. It was only handed down kind of a day ago. Greg and Matt, you were both in the lockup. Greg, I'll come to you first. The treasurer had kind of a lot of things that he's trying to manage in this budget. As always, what were some of the key things that he was taking into consideration or had to be careful of? And what was your overall impression of the budget?
Well, I mean, the key things that he was worrying about clearly were inflation and cost of living, or at least sort of decline in living standards, which is probably a better way of putting it. So that was sort of the overarching thing, because the government knows that any interest rate rises from here on in, they're going to wear the pain of them. So if they had a budget that looked like, oh, it's going to cause that to happen, that's not good when you're sort of 9 months out from an election. So that was sort of the overarching thing, but also underlying that is we've got a very weak economy. We saw that in the first 3 months of this year, retail spending actually went backwards. Not only the amount we spent, but the amount of things we were buying went backwards, which is not good. It's a sign that everyone's struggling.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that points to like a weakness in the economy.
Yeah, really weak economy, weak growth. And so he couldn't do an austerity budget. If he'd done that and think, oh, we've got to really jump on inflation and try and slow the economy, well, the economy's already pretty slow. So he needed to find a bit of a balance. And the problem is he found a balance, but he did it by doing a lot of nothing.
Mm.
You know, you often think of a budget and think, okay, they want to have everyone talking about a one thing that comes out of it. And there really wasn't kind of that. I mean, we're in the lockup. It was quite interesting. We were sort of turning the pages of the speech and the budget papers and going, okay, they've announced that already. Yeah, they've announced that already. It's, oh yeah, there's an energy supplement, but we knew that was coming, and then it was like, oh,
when's the story?
That's it. Oh, okay. Right, we got to write some articles about this. How are we going to do it? Then we were in the lockup and looking at the TV, and they'd already leaked the energy supplement before we came out of the lockup. We thought, well, that was a great 6 hours we just spent.
Matt, what would you add to that? You kind of, we spoke for our podcast earlier this week and kind of talking about, it was like lots of little announcements, but not really tackling any of the big problems.
Yeah, no, there are big structural problems in the Australian economy that need to be addressed. And this budget kind of sort of almost looks like it's trying to tackle some of them, but in a way that won't do anything. Housing, aged care, you name the area, domestic violence, whatever it is, there was a little bit of money that might patch something for a brief period of time, but nothing that will actually change, nothing that you would call reform. The only thing that I don't want to just talk negatively about the budget. I thought that their way of providing cost of living relief whilst also reducing inflation, so increasing the Commonwealth rent assistance, the energy supplement, that'll actually reduce inflation. And that's an excellent way to help people out at a time when the government also wants to reduce inflation. So it was a nothing budget that kind of didn't do any real reform, but it did do something to help people. I mean, stage 3 tax cuts, that there was some cost of living relief, and I don't think it'll be inflationary. So, that was good.
Yeah, Rachel, I wanted to come to you because there's kind of been a lot of discussion that this is really a pre-election budget in the way, it's got the stage 3 tax cuts. There was very kind of targeted cost of living relief and some less targeted, the energy supplement in particular. They've kind of been copying it for, a lot of MPs like Senator David Pocock and things saying, we don't need that kind of $300. But really, as far as I can see, this was quite targeted to try and help the RBA not put interest rates up again and hopefully reduce them before the next election. That seemed to me like a lot of what it was targeted at. What's your impression of how it's been received by politicians and the public so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in saying it is a pre-election budget. they will be really hoping to stick the landing here with having inflation coming down just in time for the election. The $300 rebate, energy rebate, sort of makes everyone feel like they got a little prize. And that will also time really nicely leading up to the next election. So I think it very much was a pre-election budget, but within the parameters of not being able to be one where they splash cash around, because to have interest rates go up before the election would be even worse than not doing anything, I think. So yeah, I mean, the Treasurer certainly seems outwardly confident that he has managed to strike the right balance here. But yeah, as you mentioned as well, the sort of $300 for everyone has been widely criticized because it is kind of, it feels a little bit lazy. I mean, we have seen the Treasurer justify that by saying, you know, it's actually the means testing it would have been costly, and you know, that money might as well be going to people. And you know, the way it's being done is supposed to be deflationary. But the fact is, there are people who are living below the poverty line in this country who will be living below the poverty line after this budget as well. And as Greg has written about, the fact is budgets are about priorities. And there was a choice here that $3.5 billion in energy subsidies could have been put towards something that was more targeted and was aimed at lifting those who are doing it really, really tough out of poverty. And once again, that opportunity has been missed. And it sort of feels like, if they couldn't do it now, when will they do it?
Yeah. I can see we've got over 450 people joining us online. Thank you. Just a reminder that you can put in questions for the panel in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But yeah, Greg, that brings us back to the budget and this idea that there wasn't really tackling any of those big things. One of the things you've talked a lot about in your columns over many, many years is the need to increase the rate of Jobseeker in particular. We've seen that failure again, and the delivery of a surplus. Like, explain the dynamics of that for us, as well as the politics, I guess.
It's really interesting because Paul Karp, my colleague, I guess, from Guardian, actually asked the Treasurer a really good question in his National Press Club speech on Wednesday, where he basically said, you said we couldn't raise Jobseeker last time because, you know, we were in a deficit and saving money. Now we're in a surplus, and you say we can't do it because of inflation. And he actually said, okay, give us the conditions that would be in place. And of course, he completely squibbed it. You know, he didn't answer it.
There are no conditions.
Yeah, there are no, and it's something, you know, Richard Dennis has been pointing out that, you know, it's so easy to come up with an excuse for not raising Jobseeker. I mean, here we had the government's own inclusion committee set up, chaired by Jenny Macklin, former government ALP minister, who recommended raising Jobseeker to 90% of the age pension. Now, to be honest, that would still keep them in poverty, but it would actually be at a rate which is historically pretty good. That's kind of where it used to be in the 80s and early 90s. And then in 1996, someone got elected and decided to change things. I can't recall his name. And things have got bad ever since. And you're right. Rachel's right. I mean, but I would argue that, and I have seen people saying, oh, you know, why wasn't means? And I think what we need to acknowledge is it wasn't a choice between doing the energy supplement and Jobseeker, or doing the energy supplement and something else. They could do both.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There were plenty of opportunities where they could have, if they were saying, oh, no, but that would have made the deficit bigger. Well, there was plenty of opportunities where you could have addressed some of the inequities in the budget, such as how we tackle capital gains, how we give money to fossil fuel companies through the fuel tax rebate. There were so many ways they could have done it. Instead, they did kind of not. I mean, the Jobseeker thing is, I think, a perfect encapsulation of how this government comes up with good ideas but doesn't really follow through them, because there was actually an increase in Jobseeker. There was an increase in Jobseeker for people who got a medical condition that basically limits them to working no more than 14 hours a week. Basically, it was for people who probably should be on disability support pension, but due to a range of factors don't qualify for it. And they raised it not to 90% of the age pension, which would be about $120 a week increase. No, they gave them about $27 a week, which puts them in line with what people who are on Jobseeker and over 55 are. And you think, okay, well, that's good. How many people did it affect? 4,700 people. You know, it's like,
yeah.
oh God, and other things like the payments for students who have to do prac work. You think, yeah, great idea, well done, really good policy. And then you go, oh, you're giving them $8 an hour, and you're like, it's just, come on, please. It's like they've come up with a budget that goes, oh, we did something for people on Jobseeker, we did something for students, we did something on housing, we did something on this, and this, and you go, yeah, but you didn't actually do much on all of those things. But we've got a nice banner that we can do when we go to an election.
Yeah, look, previous Labor governments, think Rudd Gillard, you got the NDIS, we got the Gonski reforms, we got the carbon price, which admittedly was rolled back. Hawke Keating, lots of reform. Whitlam, huge amounts of reform. What has Albanese done? Like, what has he got to hang his hat on?
Bits on IR. That's about it.
But like, it doesn't feel like a reforming Labor government. That's what it doesn't feel like.
And also, the key thing about choices is, and I was thinking on this on Tuesday night, no matter how disappointed we are, thank God they actually did make the choice to change stage 3, because could you imagine how dire it would have been if we'd had all this nothing?
Yeah.
Plus Scott Morrison's stage 3 coming into effect, it would have been really dark. So, but that shows the choice is there. They can't do it.
And they got rewarded for making that change.
So Matt, just remind everyone what those changes to the stage 3 tax cuts were.
Yeah, look, the stage 3 tax cuts under Morrison, half of them were going to go to people earning more than $180,000 a year. Now they're much more evenly spread. Certainly people at the top are still getting the largest tax cut, but people between 45,000 and 135,000 are going to get $800 more a week. People under 45,000 under the old stage 3 would get nothing. Everybody who pays tax, so everybody under 45,000 who pays tax will get a tax cut. So they were much more evenly spread.
I would just add to that, it's amazing to me, considering that was something they almost didn't do. There were years of people calling for reform to those tax cuts, and the amount of times it has been mentioned since they did it, and the large chunk of sort of the budget speech and the post-budget interviews, that it's just playing this massive role. Like, you could almost argue it's the centerpiece. I've seen it described as the centerpiece. And for something that they essentially had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do, they certainly want a lot of credit for it. And look, they should get the credit for it. It's good that it's been done, but it is amazing to me that it forms such a large part of the budget. And I wonder what would the budget centerpiece have been if not for that.
Well, and if they hadn't changed it, like, they wouldn't have had much to play with, presumably, because it's a huge package on its own. Like, they wouldn't have much room to do other huge big centerpiece
and we
things.
would have been saying, well done, you delivered a $21 billion tax cut to rich people, and it just would have looked I hate talking about the optics, but the optics would have been terrible.
Yeah.
But as I say, I think it is something that we shouldn't ignore, especially because Matt wrote millions of report papers. I wrote heaps of op-eds. We did a lot of work on it. I think it's really good that they did change it, but it just shows, again, they made a choice on something big, and then we were hoping they would see that and realize, actually, we're in power. We can do things. we can change the country.
Labor voters will reward us for reforming.
And then we're going to change nothing.
Yeah. I want to come now to the future gas strategy, which the government released last week amongst a bunch of other budget leaks and things, Rachel, but not only was it fiercely criticised by the Greens, a lot of Teals and the environment movement, but it caused some problems on the Labor backbench as well.
Yeah, we saw, I think, within a couple of hours, backbenchers like Josh Burns in Macnamara in Melbourne, and Jerome Laxdale, Bennelong, immediately put out statements, not directly criticising the government, but talking about the importance of an end date to fossil fuels, the importance of the transition, sort of talking up how many good things the government had done in transitioning us towards renewables as well. But, you know, sort of obliquely criticizing the gas strategy, which implies, well, says that gas will continue past 2050, which is insane. And so, you know, there was this idea that they were blindsided by this. There were sort of the lines coming out. It seems like they were, but that for people who hold sort of progressive inner city seats, this is exactly the kind of thing that they claim that by being in the Labor Party and by keeping Labor left MPs in the caucus that they can push back against. But they sort of were shown to be entirely powerless here. It really looks like Madeleine King is in charge of that policy entirely, the resources minister over in Western Australia. So we saw this little mini revolt, but then of course, when it came to Parliament, no one actually crossed the floor against it. No one voted against it. But I think these seats are going to be even more in contention now than they were before. And you will see, I think, these Labor backbenchers. There's also Higgins in Melbourne. Who else spoke out? Jed Carney's seat. Yeah, it's a lot of Melbourne seats that have big Green threats coming for them. And so, yeah, I think we will continue to see these Labor left or Labor MPs holding left-leaning seats, really trying to make it clear that they don't agree with the party's policy while not actually doing anything.
Yeah. And if we stick with the politics of it for a second, you mentioned Madeleine King. Obviously, a huge amount of our gas industry is based in WA. Labor will be trying to hold on to seats over there. Presumably, that's the other part of the political equation here for the future gas strategy, that, you know, Labor wants to hold on to the seats that it won in Western Australia. Would that be your assessment? What else do you think is at play here?
Yeah, look, Western Australia and Queensland as well, which are both big sort of resources states. Very different in that Labor is kind of at a high watermark in Western Australia, won a whole lot of seats over there that it couldn't possibly hope to retain all of them. And then Queensland's kind of the opposite, got very few seats. So they're going to win some, I guess. I think that it is going to be difficult, though, for the Albanese government to try to speak to these Western Australian and Queensland voters at the same time as trying to fight these battles in the inner city. And I think you can see it trying to walk both sides of the street with having the future gas strategy and the Made in Australia policy, both like incredibly vague names for kind of overarching policies, but they're trying to be like, look, no, we are doing the transition and we are investing in renewables and we are serious, but also out the other side of its mouth telling voters in states that really care about the resources industry, oh no, don't worry, we're going to keep doing this too.
Greg, we've kind of touched on some of the problems with it, but economically speaking, there's kind of much more investment in gas, including in carbon capture and storage. And we've put out some recent research about the level of fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, there's not a lot to like in this future gas strategy. It's pretty much a disaster for the climate.
Yeah, it's a disaster for the climate. It was a disaster for the budget. I think, yeah, the backbenchers were annoyed. I reckon Jim Chalmers would have been pretty annoyed as well, because when we got to the budget, there was no mention of gas at all. Now, whether there'd been a really quick edit, but
it didn't need to come out right before the budget.
Did not need to come out. I mean, yeah, all of the Madeleine King's report, it was all basic. I mean, there really wasn't anything in there, a bit of regulatory stuff, and it was all about, oh, we'll help you find the gas and you can do it. But the best thing, I think, of the gas strategy wasn't that it's terrible. That is a terrible aspect, but it actually laid bare how stupid the government's policy is. If everyone was sort of thinking, oh, this is, it wasn't a case of Madeleine King got the policy wrong. She explained the policy correctly, and it is completely stupid. It, opens up with the sense of, oh, we need to transition away from gas, so we need to invest more gas so that we can export more gas where the demand for exports is going down. So we need to find more. There was nothing. It was confusing itself from sentence to sentence. It was clearly rushed. There were typos through the whole damn thing. There were paragraphs that were repeated. It feels a little bit like Madeleine King wanted a bit of a spotlight to maybe assuage some gas companies or something.
Yeah,
but
it
there was
really was.
no.
I want to lose
strategy.
weight, so I'm going to eat more junk food. I want to quit smoking, so I'm going to smoke more cigarettes. And the government's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by burning more fossil fuels.
Yeah,
Mm.
we've seen this sort of lack of logic all along, where I think it was Chris Bowen and certainly Penny Wong who have been talking about, oh, we need to export more gas to Japan. Not only because that'll somehow keep the region stable, and basically because Japan's got a terrible energy policy, and apparently it's our duty to help them out. But also this argument of, oh, we need to sell them gas now so that if we then want to sell them hydrogen, they will. So we need to sell more gas now so that we can sell them less gas later. It really is a dumb policy, but it's great because now we have it clear that Madeleine King, the Minister for Resources, saying in bold in an op-ed in the AFR, saying that we need more gas out to 2050. As soon as that's going to be everywhere, but from the Greens, Teal saying, don't vote Labor, vote for another party who will actually get things done. I think there'd be many in the Labor Party just going, well, thanks, Madeleine. You've said it out loud, what we were hoping no one would notice. We've been saying it out loud, but now that you suddenly got the government saying it, it's like, see?
Yeah, and I think Laura Tingle talked about it being an egregious act of political toadying, didn't hold back on that, but kind of making the point that Labor went to the last election really trying to champion the fact that it takes climate change seriously. It was going to put in place serious targets. As he said, in the budget, there was quite a number of measures around manufacturing and the green energy future and those kinds of things. But I mean, none of that is worth a damn if we keep expanding the gas industry.
I keep wondering, Scott Morrison infamously brought in, a lump of coal and said, this is coal, there's nothing wrong with it. I wonder if Anthony Albanese is going to bring in a gas bottle and have a bit of a
huff.
Maybe bring in a hydrogen balloon. There's nothing wrong with it. This is hydrogen. There's nothing wrong.
So I don't think that's hydrogen, Greg.
Helium?
You're an economist, not a chemist.
Your chemistry teacher would be so proud.
Hey, I got out of chemistry year 10. I knew I could. No.
I am going to move us to questions from the audience very shortly. But I did just want to touch on, Rachel, a story that seems to have broken today about the Prime Minister and an investment property that he has. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, the Prime Minister happens to have a few investment properties, and this is one that he has in Western Sydney, and he is looking to, it seems he's looking to sell up, so he has asked his tenant to go, and that tenant has decided to plead to stay on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, and Anthony Albanese is being asked about this in all of his post-budget rounds this morning. And, I think this is one of those ones where some people are going to come down on the line of, oh, like he's allowed to sell his property. What do you mean? Like, surely landlords should be allowed to make decisions. But I think at the end of the day, the optics of him being a landlord are already quite terrible in the rental crisis, and don't quite gel with his narrative of himself as someone who grew up in public housing, and now to be evicting someone, which he is legally entitled to do, but to be evicting someone in the middle of a rental crisis, it doesn't really matter if he was a good landlord, as he keeps saying, although he says owner, good owner, not landlord, because he doesn't want to refer to himself as a landlord. But to be doing this at this particular point is just terrible optics. And I mean, being a landlord at all, and to be Anthony Albanese and being a landlord, I think is terrible optics. And I don't understand why politicians don't just get out of the landlord game before they go into politics or before they get anywhere near the leadership. Of course, if he wants to sell more and cease being a landlord, that would probably also help with the optics. But the fact that it seems to be something about his upcoming wedding, he keeps saying my circumstances have changed. It doesn't sound great. This is a guy who can clearly afford to have a couple of properties.
I think he's going to be that he's got to sell a house to.
He doesn't need 4 houses now. He's getting married. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, it is an optics issue that a lot of politicians have. We've seen Susan Lee get in trouble in the past over investment properties. I think Peter Dutton, from memory, reading the quarterly essay from Lech Blaine, is pretty much like a property mogul in his own right.
He's gotten rid of most of his, to be honest.
has he?
In recent years, he's sold up a bunch of them. Not sure what that's about, but
yeah. Well, maybe
he made millions through property though.
Yeah. Great. We're going to come to questions from the audience. I can see we've got close to 500 people on the line with us. Thank you so much. Don't forget, you can type in questions for the panel, and you can upvote other people's questions if you think they're good ones that you would like me to put to them. The first one is from Ronald Smith, and he says, the gas strategy, why can't we adopt a long-term strategy like Norway, where fossil fuels are taxed at 78%, which goes to the common good of all citizens? That would be a real reform. Greg, can I put that one to you first?
It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I don't know why. Well, there's no reason why we can't do it, except the line I've been saying is forget about carbon capture and storage. It's ministerial capture and storage at the moment. And really, that's all it is. I mean, we should be, as Richard Dennis always says, when in other countries like Norway, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, when the price of gas or the price of oil goes up, they celebrate because they're going to be reeling in the revenue. Whereas here we go, oh, that means the price of my petrol or my energy bill is going to go up, and we know we're not going to be any richer because we're not getting anything back. I mean, one of the things we were looking at when we went in the budget is looking at how much is going to be raised by the petroleum resources rent tax, which is notionally the tax on super profits of these gas companies, had one of the worst returns for this current financial year, so low that luxury car tax was higher. So people buying a luxury car paid more tax than the gas companies did for their PRT, which is just incredible.
And also, people
who
what they
smoke.
say, for cigarettes, beer, spirits. I mean, there is an
visa application. People getting a visa to travel paid more tax than the gas companies did for PRT. So clearly, yeah, they should be raising more. I mean, one of the other aspects, we saw when we're talking about the gas strategy and this future made in Australia thing, one of the big, $7-8 billion spends, which isn't really, over 11 years, tax subsidies on green hydrogen, which you think, yep, we do need green hydrogen. It is an absolute must for an emission-less economy. We got to actually have a manufacturing industry that can produce steel off of renewable energy, and green hydrogen is key for that. And our colleague Matt Ryan sort of ran the figures and looked at how much green hydrogen we're going to produce on an annual basis in those peak years if all of the budgeted amount is sort of used with investments. And the amount of green hydrogen that would be produced is equivalent to about 2% of the amount that we export each year in LNG. And it's like, again, this great, oh, good, you're investing in green energy. This is fantastic. And they go, oh, yeah, it's just a little, you know.
Yeah, can you just repeat that?
Yeah. So
what percentage?
2%. So in, let's say, 2032, when we've got this green massive investment, so-called, off the back of this billion-dollar tax concessions for green hydrogen, they'll be producing about the equivalent of 2% of all of the LNG that we ship off each year. So, and
Bit of a drop in the bucket. You got to start somewhere, Greg.
you got to start. But, and as we've been arguing, maybe if we, so with, instead of about a $6 billion over 11 years, we'd need probably closer to 60 billion to actually get serious about the thing. You think, well, where can we get that money? Have you looked at how much LNG we're exporting and how little we're actually taxing? Maybe there's a way there we can do something.
Not getting much of a return there on the resource that we all own, but not benefiting much from. I've got a number of questions in here about the $300 energy supplement. And Matt, I think it's really to follow up on your point of how does that actually help reduce inflation?
That's a great question. So the CPI is the measure of inflation that the RBA targets. So they want to get the CPI between 2 and 3%. And the CPI measures the cost of living for consumers. And it's what consumers pay that the ABS is measuring. So if the government came along and reduces the price of something, in this particular case, electricity, but it could be medicine, it could be rent. If they're reducing the amount that consumers pay, then that will reduce the CPI because electricity is a part of the CPI. So effectively, by reducing the price consumers pay, even though they're not actually reducing the cost of it in total, it's just the government's paying some of it, because they're only measuring the price that consumers pay, because consumers are paying less, then that affects the CPI. And they reckon it'll be about 0.5% next year.
And so we've had all this sort of commentary that, it's only reducing the measured inflation. It's like, well,
it's the measured inflation at the RBA target.
There's no unmeasured inflation floating out there that is the real inflation. This is what it is. It's, and I've been sort of saying this as well, governments increase prices that increase inflation. We see that most with excises. Tobacco excises go up. There's a reason tobacco cigarette packets are now over $30. It's not because we're all smoking more, or it's not because businesses are charging that. It's because
another
of
example is when Morrison dramatically increased university degree costs. The ABS recorded how much that increased the CPI, and it was about 0.25% over a couple of years. The CPI is higher because of those university fees that went up, because the price to consumers, to students, had increased.
And one of the things as well is when CPI does come down, so if it, instead of, say, being 3.5%, this goes 3% because of this factors, that actually affects inflation expectations. It affects things like indexation of payments. It all sort of flows through to actually reduce, overall inflation. So these comments of, it's not really reducing inflation. It's like, well, it is, because that's how we measure inflation. And also the way it's been done, it's not a $300 check to everyone. So you're not going to get $300 in the mail and go, right, I'm off to JB Hi-Fi. You're going to get a bill. You're still getting a bill, and it's not even going to be $300 off one bill. It's spread over. They're doing $75 each quarter. So you're still going to get that bill. You're still going to have to pay something unless your bill is less than $75. So you're going to have to pay a bill. You're going to see, the rebate there, $75. Oh, that's nice. It's, thank God I don't have to pay whatever
it would have been otherwise.
But you're not going to be going, I can't believe anyone really is going to be going, $75. Let's go shopping.
Let's go spend it.
You're not going to feel richer. You're just not going to feel as poor. And that's a big difference in terms of what it does to the overall economy.
And managing inflation and people's spending and that risk of,
And also, and it really is also about what we at the Australian Institute have been really pushing. inflation at the moment is not because we're all out there spending like mad. It's not because we are pushing up prices. It's because there's been a lot of supply side issues that have affected things like gas, coal prices that all affect our energy
And
costs.
profits have been up and
Yeah, and so
wages have been
when
keeping pace.
inflation is occurring because of things like that, actually the right economic thing to do is what the government's done is actually say, hey, we actually have some control over prices. Let's help out people temporarily, and that's all this is. We certainly are not out there arguing, oh, let's do this from now on ever.
Yeah.
No, you do it in response to a supply shock.
The next question I've got is from Alison Kakakios. I think I've mucked up your surname there, Alison. I apologize. She's talking about Ross Gittins, the columnist for the Sydney Morning Herald and Age on economics. He's talking about, I think he's the editor there, the refusal to fix Jobseeker payment being utterly shameful, and that Albanese and the ministers should hang their heads in shame. The question, what do you think of that? But I guess I just wanted to come back to that, you know, the optics in a cost of living crisis of evicting a tenant. Like, despite a lot of these cost of living measures, there's still a lot of people who are really struggling.
Yeah, and I mean, ACOS CEO Cassandra Goldie has made a really big point that sort of helping those people is, and helping them with an increase in Jobseeker, which is the best way to help them, is what's really missing from this budget. I mean, I think as Ross Gittins acknowledges in that piece, there are a large number of Australians who don't care about this issue, so it's not necessarily a vote winner. And so it's easy for the government, especially when they're more focused on, you know, the election, to just kind of leave that one and say, oh, look, you know, we did it last year. Jim Chalmers has pointed out in quite a few answers when it's put to him that he didn't raise it. Oh, we raised it by $40 a fortnight last year, which is far, far less than what his own Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee had recommended. But, you know, it sort of comes down to this idea that until it becomes a vote changer, why would the government feel the need to do anything about it? I mean, being a Labor government, you would think that would be reason enough. But yeah, at this point, it doesn't seem to be their priority or enough of a concern to enough Australians for them to go there.
I mean, Matt, one of the things we were talking about before it was we were sure that, one, the government probably wouldn't do anything, raise it, but we thought they might actually at least change the way in which it's indexed, because currently it's indexed just to CPI, whereas the age pension is indexed to the CPI, but also linked to average weekly earnings, full-time weekly earnings. And so we thought maybe they could at least change it so it'll go up in line with wages, because that actually wouldn't cost much because wage growth is so low. But they didn't even do that, did they?
Yeah, look, one of the things they could do, look, I would prefer they changed it now, but if this is not the right time to increase it, and let's be clear, there's never a right time, but if it's not the right time, then why not say, oh, okay, over the next 4 years, we're going to increase it by a quarter to where they're out of poverty. So we'll increase it by 25% each year and lock in, right, those increases. Because at the moment, all it not the right time means is that it will never happen. Whereas if they actually legislated it, look, again, I'd rather it happen now, but if they legislated a time frame where it's actually going to happen, then it would happen. So pass the legislation to increase it and do it slowly if that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
But that's better than doing nothing year after year.
I mean, they did that with the superannuation guarantee, and so it became a thing.
Did it with those three tax cuts. They were legislated 7 years out.
Exactly. So you could say, right, we're not going to do it now, but by 2030, unemployment and age pension will be in line with, you know, the poverty line. And here's our stage, you know, because again, then that's not going to cost much, even though, you know, it obviously can afford to do it. But yeah, you're right. It's that whole thing. Where's your damn ambition, Labor? Come on.
Yeah.
Power.
So along those lines of ambitions, the next question from Margaret Dingle is about being in favour of the government subsidising renewable energy and critical minerals, but why subsidise gas considering it's fossil fuel and with massive greenhouse potential?
It has never been more profitable to be a gas company right now. They are making a mozza.
So clearly we need to help them out.
Yeah.
Give them a helping hand. Otherwise, they
60
might take more of their profits over. I don't know.
$60 billion in excess profits
They
made.
might take our gas and go elsewhere with it. No.
And so $60 billion in profits. And if people
Excess
listening,
profits on top of that.
excess-
So this is
Yeah.
the additional stuff.
oh God.
No, not right, it's more than that.
And for people at home who aren't aware, on Monday, the Australia Institute released a report showing that across state, territory, and federal governments, on top of all those excess profits, plus the regular profits that they normally make, all of our governments are subsidizing fossil fuel industries, not just the gas industry, but the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $14.5 billion.
A year.
That's a new record that has increased.
Oh, go us.
And so
Australia.
Margaret's question was actually around, can't we be replacing those with the exports that we were talking about with green hydrogen, but also what other things could we be doing if we weren't subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $14.5 billion every year?
Well, I mean, higher education could be free. We
There's
could
housing.
raise jobs.
We could build
build
houses.
some houses.
We could fix Medicare. We could include dental in Medicare. We could lift the unemployed out of poverty. Like, there is an enormous amount of structural issues in Australia at the moment that people are crying out to have fixed. Instead we just to be clear, Australia is a super low tax country. We are one of the lowest tax developed countries in the world. If we collected just the average of the other rich countries, just the average, we would have to collect over $100 billion every year more in tax.
More. $100 billion.
And that wouldn't make us a
more.
high tax country. That would put us somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the good things about the budget is you kind of can't hide things. I mean, they try, but at some point you got to put it down in black ink that this is what's been done. And the classic was the fuel tax rebate, which actually in the budget is going to increase. It's bigger now than it was projected to be last year, and it has there underneath explaining why, and it's because they expect that there's going to be more use of diesel than in the past, and that's why the diesel fuel tax credit is going to go up. So in effect, they are saying, yeah, we actually have got an economy and a budget set in place that is encouraging more fossil fuel use. And we're actually going to keep giving mostly mining companies, also some agriculture, but overwhelmingly mining companies, a nice little credit.
More gas, more diesel.
More subsidy because of that.
Rachel, I want to come back to kind of the other things happening in federal politics at the moment. It hasn't been smooth sailing for the government with some unforced errors and other things, just events and world events happening. But looking ahead to the next couple of weeks, what do you think are some of the key things that the government is either going to be obviously rolling out the budget, but what are some of the other issues that are currently on its plate that it's trying to manage and resolve at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think it is obviously the big constant ongoing one is trying to manage its rhetoric around it and its policy position towards Israel. In recent weeks, I think it's always ratcheting up a little bit, but we've seen, the protest movement growing, and the government sort of again trying to make it clear that it doesn't condone what's going on in Gaza, but still not actually taking that final step to actually do something to distance itself from Israel. So I think that is going to be ongoing. I think the student protests aren't going anywhere, and what's going on at Melbourne Uni at the moment with one of the buildings is, I think the government is going to keep trying to handle this without offending anyone, and the coalition is going to continue to leap on anything that the Albanese government says and paint it as anti-Israel. So I think we have been watching this play out for months now, and I think it's just going to continue. I think the other issue that is still floating around is the release of the immigration detainees under the High Court ruling. The government had a little win in court the other week with the latest case, which was sort of this case about an asylum seeker who was refusing to cooperate with their own deportation, who was, appealing through the legal system to have another ruling saying that they also deserve to be free, or that they couldn't be locked up indefinitely. And that was what the government's sort of really draconian legislation that it put out a couple of months ago was about responding to. But they actually won that case. So that refugee remains locked up. Anyone in those circumstances remains locked up. But that policy is still sitting on the table, and it has gotten a lot of blowback from the committee that was there's the Senate inquiry into it, from human rights groups, civil rights groups, and also the coalition, which despite having a big song and dance about how could you let these people out, has also turned around and decided to say that legislation is too unfair on people from countries who will be blanket banned, certain select countries that don't accept forced returns. So I think that issue also has a long way to play out. And the Labor Party has really got itself in a bind here, putting forward this like really draconian legislation, trying to out Dutton, and the community and the coalition have gone, oh, too much. But they seem like they're going to stick with it, despite it no longer being required for the case that it was supposed to counteract. So, yeah, I think that's another big test for Labor.
Another court case I was going to ask about was David McBride's sentencing this week. Again, I just feel like there's such a strong contrast here between what Labor went to the last election kind of talking about in terms of accountability and transparency and those kinds of things. Yeah, whistleblower protections. And now the first person jailed for war crimes is the bloke who blew the whistle, not anyone who did an actual war crime. It's quite something.
Yeah, I mean, that sentence being handed down I think it was the same day as the budget, was a real shame, because I think it is an outrage, and it has been for some time, that the government was choosing to proceed with prosecuting him. As you say, the only person to face jail time over those war crimes is the person who blew the whistle. But I have seen an increasing number of people showing an interest in that case since the verdict was handed down. I mean, it may have felt a little bit theoretical to people before now. Whistleblower stuff doesn't always get huge amounts of attention, but since the sentence was handed down, I've seen just like an increasing level of shock that a Labor government, and one that has talked a lot about whistleblower protections and freedom of the press, has been the one that has overseen this travesty. So again, I think that's an issue that's got a little bit of a way to play out as well.
Yeah, and Mark Dreyfus just kind of washed his hands of it, being like, oh, this was a DPP decision and my hands are tied. There's nothing I can do.
He's not the Attorney General.
It's quite something. I think that's probably got a long way to go. And then the only other thing I was going to ask about, Rachel, and I'm not sure how across the United States presidential election you are, but Australia's kind of got a lot at stake with AUKUS and the nuclear submarine deal, and we've put all our eggs in the United States basket, and increasingly it looks like it could be heading towards another Trump presidency. I mean, do you think the government has turned its mind much to managing this potential orange problem coming down the pipeline?
I'm sure there is some smart heads in the government trying to work out what to do there. I mean, funnily enough, like for those that don't think AUKUS is a great idea, that could ultimately be the way out of it. If it's Donald Trump that gets Labor out of that bind, that very expensive bind that is continuing to cause division within Labor, that would be quite something. But we saw overnight, for some reason, Scott Morrison has gone and met with Donald Trump on his tour, his religious book tour. So I think there will be some people trying to work on turning Trump around on that. I mean, Trump sort of goes with whoever last spoke to him, it seems, about a particular issue. So, I mean, Scott Morrison has a lot riding on AUKUS in terms of his legacy. So I imagine he will also be getting involved in this, which, you know, Kevin Rudd, Scott Morrison, what a pair to be handling this one in the US for us. But yeah, it does look increasingly like Trump will be re-elected. So it is certainly something that the government is going to have to deal with, and not just on AUKUS, but on a whole range of issues.
Greg, I just want to come back to the economy, and now having handed down this budget that's supposed to put downwards pressure on inflation. What do you think is the outlook there? Has the budget struck the right balance in terms of, you were talking about the weakness in the economy, also that it has to deal with?
I mean, it's a neutral budget in that I don't think, but yeah, I think the inflationary aspect is less of a concern because inflation was coming down anyway, and this is all a matter of margins, really. Even what the Reserve Bank was forecasting, we're talking, you know, the difference between, what was it, 3.25% and 2.75%. Yeah,
it was 0.5% difference. So the RBA was predicting if something was going to be $2 next year, the Reserve Bank was going to predict that it was $2.01. That was the difference we're talking about here.
Yeah, and so I think what's the real issue is not so much the fact that inflation is coming down or going up, or what's going to happen to interest rates, because I'm still of the view that, and the general view is, there probably won't be much of a movement on interest rates, and eventually they'll go down again. But it's the fact that the economy is weak, we're not spending, there's not a lot of massive investment, so there's no sense of this being a vibrant economy at the moment, and that's going to be the case all the way to the election. So but it's not a case where we're going to have competing parties doing what they can to increase demand or anything in the economy, because they're all so shit scared about, oh, what if we raise interest rates? So it's almost a case of, let's get to the election, and then there might be some, you know, actual addressing the fact that the economy is pretty weak at the moment. But, you know, the budget didn't, I think the budget politically was a bit of a nothing, and I think economically, apart from that sort of measure on inflation, which is fine, you know,
it's very steady as she goes.
But there's nothing there where you think, wow,
I mean, the stage 3 tax cuts will probably help.
Yeah, I mean, the stage 3
stimulate the economy a bit, but I mean, they're predicting that economic growth is only going to be 2% next year. You know, which is tiny.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Please thank our guests, Rachel Withers, Greg Jericho, and Matt Grudnoff. Rachel, if people want to keep up with what you're doing, should they follow you on Twitter? Is that the best way?
That is the best way at this point, but I'm going to be popping up in a few more outlets soon. So I'll be tweeting always.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for your questions. As always, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We will be back next week with Jennifer Robinson, and we're also doing another webinar on waste and the circular economy with Planet Arc. And Unparliamentary will be back in a fortnight, so you can tune in and register for that one as well for all the latest in federal politics. Thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Happy budget, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks so much. Bye. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified when we publish a new one. See you next time.